The radar screen flickered green against Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Nightfall, Voss's face, as she banked her F-16 Fighting Falcon through the pre-dawn darkness over Afghanistan's Kunar province. Her call sign had been a joke once, something about her habit of flying night missions when other pilots preferred daylight sorties. Now, 3 combat deployments later, nobody was laughing. The cockpit's amber glow illuminated the weathered edges of a photograph taped to her instrument panel. Her father's Air Force wings, earned in Vietnam, lost with him over Hanoi when she was 7. Nightfall, this is Overwatch. We have a situation developing, grid 347218. Navy Special Operations Team has gone dark. Last transmission indicated they were compromised. Voss adjusted her grip on the stick, feeling the familiar weight of 20,000 pounds of aircraft responding to her touch. The General Electric F-110 engine hummed with barely contained power behind her ejection seat. Copy, Overwatch. Nature of compromise. Static crackled through her headset before the controller's voice returned, tighter now. Unknown. SEAL Team 7 was conducting reconnaissance on a high-value target when communication ceased. Satellite imagery shows significant enemy movement converging on their position. She glanced at the mission clock, 3:47 hours. The SEALs had been dark for 18 minutes, an eternity in combat operations. Her wingman, Captain Torres in Sabre 2, maintained perfect formation 300 feet off her starboard wing. The mountains below stretched like sleeping giants, their peaks catching the first hint of dawn. Nightfall, be advised. Rules of engagement are restrictive. Positive visual identification required on all targets. Collateral damage must be minimized. Civilian population in the valley. Voss had heard this before. Always the restrictions, always the second-guessing from officers who'd never felt the stick shake under enemy fire or watched good men die, because bureaucrats valued political considerations over combat effectiveness. She'd been passed over for promotion twice, her personnel file-knotting, aggressive tendencies, and difficulty following complex engagement protocols. What they didn't understand was that sometimes war demanded split-second decisions that couldn't wait for committee approval. The radio crackled again, this time on the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Neptune 7 Alpha. We are compromised, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Requesting immediate close air support, over. The voice was strained but professional. A SEAL operator who knew death was measuring the distance to his position in heartbeats. Voss felt her pulse quicken as she pushed the throttle forward, the F-16 accelerating toward what would become the most important fight of her career. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss had spent 18 years proving she belonged in a cockpit, but the next 30 minutes would define whether she deserved to be remembered as just another female pilot who broke barriers, or as the aviator who saved Neptune 7 Alpha when the bureaucrats said it couldn't be done. The mountains ahead concealed more than terrain. They held 8 Navy SEALs whose lives now depended on a woman the Air Force had never fully trusted to make the hard choices. Captain Marcus, Reaper, Torres watched his flight leader bank sharply toward the emergency coordinates, her F-16's distinctive silhouette cutting through the gray pre-dawn sky like a blade. He'd flown with Voss for 6 months, long enough to recognize the subtle shift in her flying that meant she'd switched from routine patrol to combat mindset. The way she held the stick looser now, her throttle adjustments more precise. These were the unconscious movements of a pilot preparing for war. Nightfall, Sabre 2 is with you, he transmitted, adjusting his position to maintain tactical spacing. Torres had graduated from the Air Force Academy with honors, his record pristine except for one notation: tends to defer to senior leadership even when tactical situation warrants independent action. It was the kind of comment that marked officers for staff positions rather than combat commands. Voss's F-16 carried the standard loadout for close air support: 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, 2 AIM-120 AMRAAMs, a 20 mm 61 Vulcan cannon with 511 rounds, and most importantly, 4 AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles. The Mavericks were precision weapons, capable of destroying individual vehicles or structures without the massive collateral damage of larger ordnance. In the hands of an experienced pilot, they could thread the needle between enemy combatants and civilians with surgical accuracy. Neptune 7 Alpha, this is Nightfall. I have 2 F-16s inbound your position. What's your situation? Over. The SEAL's voice came back immediately, underlaid with the distinctive crack of incoming rifle fire. Nightfall, we are approximately 2 clicks northeast of target building. 8 operators, 2 wounded. Enemy strength estimated at 40 to 60 fighters, mixed small arms and RPGs. They have us pinned in a compound stone construction. We count at least 3 machine gun positions with overlapping fields of fire. Voss consulted her tactical display, cross-referencing the SEAL's position with satellite imagery downloaded during pre-flight briefing. The compound showed as a cluster of mud brick buildings typical of Afghan construction, thick walls that could stop small arms fire but wouldn't survive a direct hit from her Mavericks. The problem was distinguishing between the buildings holding SEALs and those sheltering enemy fighters. Neptune, can you mark your position with infrared strobe? Negative. Nightfall. Strobes were damaged in initial contact. We have 1 working laser designator. The laser designator would show as a bright spot on her targeting pod's infrared display, but only if she was looking at the right building. Miss by 50 meters, and she'd kill the men she'd come to save. The margin for error was measured in seconds and degrees, the kind of precision that separated competent pilots from the exceptional ones. Far below, Master Chief Petty Officer Devon Anchor, McKinnon pressed his back against the compound wall, feeling the vibration of enemy bullets striking the other side. His team had walked into what intelligence officers called a prepared ambush. Insurgents who'd had time to position fighters in mutually supporting positions with clear fields of fire. McKinnon had been a SEAL for 14 years, long enough to know when tactical doctrine said his unit was in an impossible position. That was when you needed pilots willing to break a few rules. The dawn sky lightened gradually, revealing the stark beauty of Afghanistan's mountainous terrain and the deadly reality of Neptune 7 Alpha's situation. Master Chief McKinnon could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, insurgents who'd spent hours, maybe days, preparing this killing field. His radio operator, Petty Officer Davis, had taken shrapnel in the leg during their initial attempt to break contact. Hospital Corpsman Rodriguez was working on Davis behind a low stone wall, using his own body to shield the wounded SEAL from incoming fire. "Chief, I count 20-plus fighters moving to flank us from the north," reported Petty Officer Jackson, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Jackson was their youngest team member, 23 years old with eyes that had seen too much in his 2 combat deployments. "They're coordinating movement. This isn't random." McKinnon nodded, his weathered face grim. Intelligence had described their target as a low-level Taliban logistics coordinator operating from a remote compound. What they'd found instead was a carefully orchestrated trap, probably designed to capture American Special Operations personnel for propaganda purposes. The insurgents weren't trying to kill them quickly. They wanted prisoners. Overwatch, Neptune 7 Alpha. Request immediate extraction or close air support. We cannot hold this position much longer. The response came through layers of static. Neptune, be advised extraction assets are not immediately available. Air support is inbound. Estimated time on station 6 minutes. 6 minutes might as well be 6 hours. McKinnon could see insurgents moving closer, using the compound's maze of buildings and walls for cover. They were professional fighters, probably foreign volunteers with military training. The kind of enemy that understood how to use terrain and coordinated fire to gradually compress a defensive perimeter until resistance became impossible. Above the sound of gunfire, McKinnon heard something that made him look up, the distant rumble of jet engines. F-16s, flying fast and low. He'd worked with Air Force close air support before, enough to know that most pilots were competent but cautious. They followed procedures, waited for perfect target identification, required multiple confirmations before releasing ordnance. Today, his team needed someone willing to take risks. Neptune 7 Alpha, this is Nightfall. I have visual on your compound, attempting to identify enemy positions with targeting pod. The voice belonged to a woman, which surprised McKinnon less than it might have 5 years earlier. Women had been flying combat missions in Afghanistan for over a decade, and some of the most aggressive close air support he'd experienced had come from female pilots who seemed to take personal offense at insurgents shooting at American ground forces. Lieutenant Colonel Voss rolled her F-16 into a wide orbit around the compound, her targeting pod's high-resolution camera revealing the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. The SEALs were trapped in a rectangular courtyard surrounded by single-story buildings. Insurgent fighters occupied positions in at least 4 separate structures, their muzzle flashes clearly visible through the infrared display. The geometry was textbook urban warfare, overlapping fields of fire designed to prevent movement in any direction. The problem was civilian presence. Satellite imagery showed the compound was part of a larger village, and thermal imaging detected heat signatures that could be non-combatants sheltering in nearby buildings. Rules of engagement were explicit. Positive identification of military targets was required before weapon release, and any strike that might cause civilian casualties required approval from ground commanders. Overwatch, this is Nightfall. I have multiple enemy positions identified but require clearance for weapon release due to proximity of civilian structures. Nightfall, stand by for clearance. We are coordinating with higher headquarters. Voss felt frustration building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. Higher headquarters meant staff officers in air-conditioned command centers, men who'd never felt the weight of a dying soldier's life measured against the bureaucratic requirements of modern warfare. While they debated and consulted lawyers, 8 Navy SEALs were running out of ammunition and options. Captain Tor's voice came across the radio. Nightfall, I'm seeing increasing enemy movement from the north. Looks like they're massing for a final assault. She could see it too. Thermal signatures moving through the village's narrow streets, converging on the compound from multiple directions. The insurgents were preparing to overwhelm the SEAL position through sheer numbers, accepting heavy casualties in exchange for capturing American prisoners. It was a tactical gamble that revealed how much intelligence value they placed on Neptune 7 Alpha. Neptune, this is Nightfall. I see your situation. What's your ammunition status? McKinnon's voice carried the strain of a professional trying to remain calm under extreme pressure. Nightfall, we're down to approximately 30% ammunition across the team. 2 men wounded, 1 seriously. We cannot sustain current rate of fire much longer. The mathematics of combat were brutally simple. 8 SEALs with limited ammunition versus 60 insurgents with prepared positions and unlimited time. Without immediate air support, Neptune 7 Alpha would be overrun within minutes. But firing missiles into a compound without proper clearance could end Voss's career and result in court-martial proceedings. Her father's photograph seemed to catch her eye from the instrument panel, a reminder of what happened to aviators who followed orders instead of their instincts. The radio crackled with increasing urgency as Master Chief McKinnon's situation deteriorated by the second. Nightfall, enemy fighters are moving to within 50 meters of our position. We have multiple casualties and are nearly out of defensive options. Lieutenant Colonel Voss could see the tactical picture developing through her targeting pod with horrifying clarity. Insurgent fighters had begun their final assault, using smoke grenades and coordinated movement to close the distance to the SEAL position. The compound's courtyard would become a killing field within minutes, and 8 of America's elite warriors would die while she orbited overhead waiting for permission to act. Overwatch, this is Nightfall. I need immediate clearance for weapon release. Ground forces are in imminent danger. Nightfall, higher headquarters is still evaluating civilian risk assessment. Continue holding position. The response hit Voss like a physical blow. She'd heard similar transmissions before, during previous deployments when good soldiers died because lawyers in Washington worried more about CNN headlines than combat effectiveness. The system had failed Neptune 7 Alpha, just as it had failed her father over Vietnam when political considerations prevented effective rescue operations. Saber 2, this is Nightfall. Take high cover and maintain Overwatch. I'm going in for a gun run. Tor's voice carried surprise and concern. Nightfall, you don't have clearance for weapon release. Copy, Saber 2. I'm conducting a show of force pass to assess enemy positions. It was a lie, and they both knew it. A show of force was a low, fast pass designed to intimidate enemy fighters without releasing ordnance. What Voss intended was something significantly more aggressive, a strafe run using her 20 cannon to neutralize enemy positions with surgical precision. The cannon's high rate of fire and limited penetration made it less likely to cause structural damage to surrounding buildings, reducing civilian casualties while providing immediate tactical support. She rolled her F-16 into a steep dive, the compound rushing toward her canopy at tremendous speed. Her hands moved across the weapon's controls with practiced efficiency, selecting guns and adjusting the targeting pipper for maximum accuracy. The G-forces pressed her back into the ejection seat as she pulled into the attack run, her vision tunneling with the intensity of combat focus. Through her headset, she could hear McKinnon coordinating his team's final defensive efforts. Jackson, conserve ammunition. Single shots only. Rodriguez, get Davis behind the north wall. Everyone else prepare for close contact. The SEALs were professionals, maintaining discipline even as their situation became hopeless. They deserved better than bureaucratic abandonment. They deserved a pilot willing to risk everything to bring them home. At 1,500 feet, Voss squeezed the trigger. The M61 Vulcan cannon erupted with devastating fury, firing depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. Each 20 projectile carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate light armor and destroy virtually any target it struck. Voss walked the stream of cannon fire across 3 insurgent positions in succession, watching through her heads-up display as enemy fighters were eliminated with clinical precision. The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. Insurgent fighters who had been advancing confidently on the SEAL position suddenly found themselves under attack from an aircraft that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The psychological impact of air-delivered cannon fire was enormous. The distinctive sound of the Vulcan's high-rate fire created panic among fighters who had never experienced close air support. Holy shit, Nightfall, that was danger close. McKinnon's voice carried amazement and gratitude. Enemy fire has decreased significantly. You just saved our asses. But Voss knew her problems were just beginning. She had fired her weapons without authorization, in direct violation of explicit orders to await clearance. The radio transmission recording would provide irrefutable evidence of her decision to prioritize tactical necessity over military law. Her career was effectively over, but 8 Navy SEALs would live to see another sunrise. Nightfall, this is Overwatch. Did you just engage targets without authorization? The question hung in the air like smoke from her cannon barrels. In the next few seconds, Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss would either lie to protect her career or tell the truth and accept the consequences. Her father's photograph caught the morning light streaming through her canopy, a silent reminder that some decisions transcended personal cost. Overwatch, this is Nightfall. Affirmative. I engaged enemy positions that posed immediate threat to friendly ground forces. The silence that followed stretched across radio frequencies, carrying the weight of military justice and the reality of combat leadership. Captain Torres maintained his overwatch position, watching his flight leader's F-16 climb away from the compound, while insurgent fighters scattered into the surrounding terrain. He understood that he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when tactical proficiency merged with moral courage to produce the kind of decision that defined military legends. Down in the compound, Master Chief McKinnon used the respite provided by Voss's gun run to coordinate his team's movement toward a more defensible position. The insurgents hadn't been eliminated entirely, but their coordinated assault had been broken by the sudden appearance of effective close air support. Petty Officer Davis was conscious and mobile despite his leg wound, while Rodriguez had managed to stabilize the bleeding using field medical supplies. Neptune 7 Alpha, this is Nightfall. I'm seeing enemy regrouping in buildings to your east. Can you move to alternate position? McKinnon surveyed the tactical situation through gaps in the compound wall. Voss's cannon fire had neutralized the machine gun positions that had pinned his team, but approximately 20 insurgent fighters remained in the area. They were more cautious now, understanding that American air power was actively engaged and willing to use lethal force. Nightfall, we can move but will need suppressive fire to reach extraction point. Our ammunition is critically low. The extraction point was a small clearing 800 meters north of the compound, far enough from civilian structures to allow helicopter operations, but requiring movement across open ground that would expose the SEALs to enemy fire. Without air support, the movement would be suicide. Voss checked her ammunition status. 421 rounds remaining in the cannon, 4 Maverick missiles, and her air-to-air weapons. She had enough ordnance to provide effective cover for the SEAL extraction, but every additional weapons engagement would add to the charges she would face in the inevitable court-martial. The radio crackled with a new voice, someone from higher headquarters with the crisp pronunciation of a staff officer. Nightfall, this is Colonel Brennan. You are ordered to cease all offensive operations immediately and return to base. Legal review of your unauthorized weapons engagement is required. Colonel Brennan had never flown combat missions, his experience limited to staff assignments and training exercises. He represented everything Voss had learned to despise about modern military leadership, officers who prioritized career advancement over battlefield effectiveness, men who had never felt the weight of life-and-death decisions measured in seconds rather than committee meetings. Colonel Brennan, this is Nightfall. I have 8 Navy SEALs requiring immediate extraction under fire. They will not survive without close air support. Nightfall, that is not your decision to make. Return to base immediately. The order carried the full weight of military authority, backed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice and decades of institutional discipline. Disobeying a direct order from a superior officer was among the most serious offenses in military law, punishable by lengthy imprisonment and dishonorable discharge. Voss's career was already finished. Now she faced the possibility of criminal conviction. But 8 SEALs were still trapped in enemy territory. Master Chief McKinnon listened to the radio exchange with growing dread. He'd worked with enough Air Force close air support to recognize the bureaucratic dynamics at play. Some staff officer who'd never heard a shot fired in anger was ordering the withdrawal of their only effective support, probably to protect his own career advancement prospects. It was a familiar story. Combat troops sacrificed for political considerations, while re-echelon officers received promotions for risk management. Neptune 7 Alpha, this is Nightfall. Voss's voice carried absolute determination. I'm staying on station. Prepare for movement to extraction point on my signal. The transmission violated direct orders from superior authority, but it also represented something increasingly rare in modern warfare: a combat leader willing to prioritize mission accomplishment over personal consequences. McKinnon felt a surge of respect for the unknown female pilot who was risking everything to bring his team home. Copy Nightfall. Neptune 7 Alpha is ready to move. Lieutenant Colonel Voss rolled her F-16 into another attack run, this time targeting the insurgent positions that threatened the SEAL movement route. Her cannon fire was precise and devastating, each burst calculated to neutralize enemy threats while minimizing collateral damage. She had become something military theorists rarely acknowledged, an individual warrior whose tactical competence and moral courage transcended institutional limitations. The sky above Afghanistan had witnessed countless acts of heroism, but few decisions carried the weight of Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss's choice to disobey direct orders in defense of 8 Navy SEALs who would otherwise die in a compound 8,000 miles from home. Her father would have understood. Captain Torres watched his flight leader conduct a second unauthorized attack run, her F-16 diving toward the compound with deadly precision. He faced his own moral dilemma: follow his orders to maintain overwatch and provide reconnaissance, or actively support Voss's violation of military law. His training emphasized chain of command and proper procedures, but his combat experience told him that sometimes bureaucracy became the enemy of mission accomplishment. The radio crackled with Colonel Brennan's increasingly agitated transmissions. Nightfall, you are in direct violation of explicit orders. Cease engagement immediately or face court-martial proceedings. Torres made his decision with the same split-second certainty that characterized the best combat pilots. Colonel Brennan, this is Sabre 2. I have multiple enemy positions engaging friendly ground forces. Request immediate clearance for defensive counter-air operations. It was military doublespeak designed to confuse staff officers while providing legal justification for weapons engagement. Torres was claiming authority to protect American aircraft from enemy ground fire, a significantly broader interpretation of rules of engagement than anyone had authorized. Sabre 2, you do not have clearance for weapon release. Copy, Colonel. Engaging enemy anti-aircraft positions threatening flight operations. Torres rolled his F-16 into a coordinated attack with Voss, their combined cannon fire devastating the remaining insurgent positions around the compound. 2 F-16s operating in tactical coordination could deliver overwhelming firepower with surgical accuracy, their 20 cannons capable of neutralizing individual enemy fighters while leaving surrounding structures intact. Master Chief McKinnon watched the air support with professional appreciation. Both pilots were demonstrating exceptional tactical competence. Their attack runs perfectly timed to suppress enemy fire while his team moved toward the extraction point. This was close air support as it was meant to function, pilots and ground forces working in seamless coordination to accomplish missions despite bureaucratic obstacles. Nightfall, Neptune 7 Alpha is moving. Enemy fire has ceased in our immediate area. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency across terrain that had been a killing field minutes earlier. Davis limped but kept pace despite his leg wound, while Rodriguez provided security with their remaining ammunition. They were 800 meters from salvation, but every step took them further from the compound's protective walls and into open ground where enemy fighters could easily acquire targets. Lieutenant Colonel Voss orbited above the SEAL movement, her targeting pod scanning for threats while her mind calculated the tactical mathematics of extraction operations. Helicopter support was still 20 minutes away, requiring her to maintain air cover until ground forces reached safety. Her fuel state remained adequate for extended operations, but her legal situation grew more complicated with every minute she remained on station in violation of direct orders. The radio erupted with a new voice, someone with command authority and combat experience. Nightfall, this is General Morrison. What is your current situation? General Morrison commanded all Air Force operations in Afghanistan, a combat veteran with multiple deployments, and a reputation for supporting frontline troops over staff officer concerns. His intervention represented either salvation or the final nail in Voss's career coffin. General Morrison, this is nightfall. I have 8 Navy SEALs moving to extraction point under enemy fire. They require continued close air support to reach safety. Copy nightfall. Continue current operations. I'm assuming tactical command of this situation. The transmission carried enormous relief and implicit authorization for everything Voss had done in the previous 20 minutes. General Morrison was placing his own considerable authority behind her decision to prioritize battlefield necessity over bureaucratic procedure. It was the kind of leadership that separated combat commanders from administrative officers. Colonel Brennan's voice returned, more subdued now. General Morrison, I was attempting to prevent unauthorized weapons engagement that could result in civilian casualties. Colonel Brennan, I'm aware of your concerns. They are noted for the record. Nightfall, continue providing close air support until ground forces reach extraction point. The exchange represented more than military hierarchy. It illustrated the tension between combat leadership and institutional risk management that characterized modern warfare. General Morrison understood that sometimes victory required officers willing to accept personal responsibility for tactical decisions, while Colonel Brennan represented systematic approaches that prioritized procedure over results. Master Chief, McKinnon's team had covered half the distance to their extraction point when new enemy contacts appeared on the ridgeline to their east. These weren't the same insurgent fighters from the compound. They were fresh reinforcements, probably alerted by radio communications, and moving to intercept the American withdrawal. The tactical situation was developing into a running firefight across open terrain, exactly the kind of engagement that favored numerical superiority over individual training. Nightfall, we have new enemy contacts bearing 090, approximately 400 meters. They're trying to cut off our movement to the extraction point. Voss could see the threat developing through her targeting pod, at least 15 fighters moving with tactical discipline toward positions that would block the SEAL escape route. These weren't local insurgents motivated by ideology. They moved like professional soldiers with military training and combat experience. The kind of enemy that understood how to use terrain and coordinated movement to achieve tactical objectives. Neptune, I see the threat. Take cover and let me neutralize those positions. This would be her third unauthorized weapons engagement in 20 minutes, each one adding to the potential charges in her court-martial. But the alternative was watching 8 Navy SEALs die, because bureaucrats in headquarters worried more about legal review than combat effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss pressed her attack with the kind of tactical aggression that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. Her F-16 diving toward the enemy positions with her cannon spitting death at 4,000 rounds per minute. The insurgent reinforcements had positioned themselves along a ridgeline that provided excellent fields of fire toward the SEAL extraction route, but their elevated position made them vulnerable to air attack. Voss's cannon fire swept across their positions with devastating effectiveness. The 20 depleted uranium rounds capable of penetrating light cover and neutralizing individual fighters with precision that amazed ground forces accustomed to less discriminating ordnance. Jesus Christ, Nightfall, that was incredible. Petty Officer Jackson's voice carried the enthusiasm of a young SEAL experiencing his first truly effective close air support. Enemy fire has completely stopped. You just saved our lives. Master Chief McKinnon was more measured in his assessment, but equally grateful. In 14 years of special operations, he'd worked with dozens of pilots providing close air support. Most were competent professionals who followed procedures and delivered ordnance when authorized. A few were exceptional aviators who understood that combat required flexibility and personal initiative that transcended regulatory compliance. Lieutenant Colonel Voss belonged to an even more exclusive category, pilots willing to sacrifice their careers for the lives of ground troops they'd never met. McKinnon had heard stories about such aviators, usually involving Medal of Honor citations and posthumous awards. It was rare to witness such decisions in real time. Nightfall, Neptune 7 Alpha has clear movement to extraction point. Estimate 15 minutes to reach designated landing zone. Captain Torres maintained overwatch position, his F-16 providing security while Voss conducted her attacks against enemy positions. He'd watched his flight leader commit career suicide 3 times in 20 minutes, each weapon's engagement representing a deliberate choice to prioritize mission accomplishment over personal consequences. It was the kind of leadership that inspired subordinates and terrified staff officers. The radio brought news that would complicate an already complex situation. Nightfall, this is Dustoff 7. We have 2 U-60 helicopters inbound your position. Estimated time arrival 12 minutes. Be advised, we're taking small arms fire from multiple positions en route. Dustoff 7 was the call sign for medical evacuation helicopters, twin-engine U-60 Black Hawks configured for casualty evacuation and personnel recovery. Their arrival would provide immediate extraction capability for Neptune 7 Alpha, but helicopters were vulnerable to enemy ground fire during landing operations. Voss would need to suppress any remaining threats in the area before the aircraft could safely approach the landing zone. Her ammunition status was becoming critical, 89 rounds remaining in the cannon, 4 unused Maverick missiles, and her air-to-air weapons. She had enough ordnance for limited additional engagement, but her fuel state was approaching the point where return to base would become mandatory regardless of ground situation. Lieutenant Colonel Voss checked her tactical display, cross-referencing fuel consumption with distance to the nearest refueling point. She had approximately 30 minutes of station time remaining before fuel considerations would force her departure, plenty of time to cover the SEAL extraction, assuming no additional complications developed. The assumption proved optimistic. Nightfall, this is Neptune 7 Alpha. We're taking sporadic sniper fire from the village to our south. Can't pinpoint exact locations, but they're slowing our movement significantly. Sniper fire was among the most difficult threats for close air support to address. Individual riflemen using civilian structures for concealment were nearly impossible to identify from aircraft altitude, and the risk of civilian casualties made weapons engagement extremely complicated. Traditional close air support doctrine recommended avoiding sniper threats through rapid ground movement rather than attempted aerial neutralization. But traditional doctrine assumed ground forces had multiple movement options and unlimited ammunition, neither of which applied to Neptune 7 Alpha's situation. Neptune, can you identify muzzle flashes or provide laser designation for sniper positions? Negative. Nightfall. Shots are coming from different locations, probably individual fighters using hit-and-run tactics. We can't provide effective target designation. The tactical problem was complex. 8 Navy SEALs with minimal ammunition facing an unknown number of concealed enemy fighters who could engage from prepared positions while remaining invisible to aerial observation. The SEALs needed to reach their extraction point, but every minute of delay increased the likelihood of additional enemy reinforcements arriving in the area. Voss made a decision that would have horrified safety officers and delighted infantry commanders. She would conduct low-level reconnaissance to identify sniper positions through direct observation. The technique was dangerous and explicitly discouraged by current doctrine, but it was also the most effective method for locating concealed enemy positions in urban terrain. Sabre 2, maintain high cover. I'm going down to identify sniper positions. Tor's voice carried concern. Nightfall, that puts you well within small arms range. Current doctrine recommends against low-level flight in contested areas. Copy Sabre 2. Sometimes doctrine doesn't match tactical requirements. Lieutenant Colonel Voss rolled her F-16 into a steep descent, trading altitude for visibility as she approached the village where enemy snipers were concealed. At 500 feet above ground level, individual buildings became clearly visible through her canopy, and muzzle flashes would be apparent to direct observation. It was also the altitude where rifle fire became potentially lethal to aircraft systems. Her father had died at low altitude over North Vietnam, his F-4 Phantom brought down by small arms fire during a rescue mission that political limitations had made impossible to complete. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was risking the same fate while violating the same kind of bureaucratic restrictions that had killed him 30 years earlier. The village spread below her canopy like a maze of flat-roofed buildings and narrow streets, the kind of terrain that provided excellent concealment for individual fighters while offering multiple escape routes after engagement. Movement on the streets was minimal. Most civilians had taken shelter when the shooting started, leaving the area to combatants and the unfortunate few who couldn't escape. At 300 feet, she saw the first muzzle flash. The sniper was positioned in a second-story window of a building approximately 400 meters from the SEAL position, his rifle pointed toward their movement route. The flash lasted only milliseconds, but it was enough for Voss to mark the location on her tactical display and designate it as a target for cannon engagement. Neptune 7 Alpha, I have one sniper position identified, taking him under fire. Master Chief McKinnon heard the F-16's engines growing louder as Voss descended toward the village, her aircraft now visible as she maneuvered for attack position. He'd never seen close air support conducted at such low altitude in urban terrain. It was the kind of aggressive flying that required exceptional pilot skill and complete disregard for personal safety. Nightfall, be advised you are extremely low. Recommend you gain altitude. Copy Neptune. I need visual identification for precise engagement. The cannon fire that followed was unlike anything McKinnon had experienced in 14 years of combat operations. Instead of the usual high-altitude delivery that relied on sophisticated targeting systems, Voss was conducting what amounted to aerial sniper fire. Single precise bursts aimed at individual enemy positions, with accuracy that seemed impossible from a fast-moving aircraft. The first sniper position vanished in a cloud of masonry dust and debris, neutralized by a 2-second burst that placed depleted uranium rounds through a second-story window with surgical precision. The psychological effect on remaining enemy fighters was immediate. Snipers who had felt secure in their concealed positions suddenly realized they faced an aircraft willing and able to engage individual riflemen with deadly accuracy. Holy shit, Nightfall. That was a direct hit on target. Sniper fire has ceased from that position. But Voss had identified at least 2 additional muzzle flashes during her low-level pass, requiring additional engagement at an altitude that made her F-16 vulnerable to any insurgent fighter with an AK-47 and decent marksmanship skills. Her remaining cannon ammunition was critically low, 47 rounds, barely enough for 2 additional engagement bursts. The tactical mathematics were becoming desperate. Insufficient ammunition, critically low altitude, unknown number of enemy positions, and fuel consumption that was approaching mandatory return-to-base parameters. Any rational assessment would recommend immediate withdrawal and request for additional air support. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss had never been accused of excessive rationality when American lives were at stake. She banked her F-16 toward the second sniper position, her targeting systems locked onto a building where enemy muzzle flashes had revealed another concealed rifleman. At 200 feet above ground level, small arms fire was a genuine threat to aircraft survival, but it was also the altitude where her cannon could deliver precision fire that would be impossible from higher elevations. The second engagement was textbook aerial gunnery, a controlled burst that placed 20 rounds through another window with devastating accuracy. The building's second story partially collapsed from the impact, creating a cloud of dust that obscured the surrounding area while eliminating another threat to the SEAL extraction. Neptune, that's 2 sniper positions neutralized. Are you still receiving fire? McKinnon coordinated with his team members, each SEAL reporting on their individual sectors of observation. The immediate threats had been eliminated, but prolonged engagement in the area would inevitably attract additional enemy reinforcements. Time was becoming as critical as ammunition. Nightfall, we're clear of immediate threats, but need to reach extraction point before enemy reinforcements arrive. Can you provide overwatch during movement? Voss checked her fuel state, 22 minutes remaining before mandatory departure.